Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Joe McQuillen, and he is going to tell us not about a near-death experience, but what has helped him in his life dealing with his son's death that I think a lot of people can benefit from. So, hi, Joe. Thank you for
Hi,
coming
Peggy.
on.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. You bet.
So, I'm going to let you start wherever you like and take as long as you like.
Well, I
Is that
guess we
okay?
start at the beginning of the path, and Christmas of 2015, so the very end of 2015, my son was home, 21-year-old boys home from college, with have a wonderful Christmas break and Christmas vacation, and we had a wonderful holiday, and he survived New Year's, although he was wild, kind of like his old man, and we were happy that there were no incidents. And then the last weekend. Of the vacation, the Christmas holiday, he and a dozen friends went up to one of their buddies' parents' lake house in southern Wisconsin, about an hour and a half away. Kick up their heels, celebrate. They got there on a Saturday. We're coming back on a Sunday morning. Have a little fun, and I was waiting for him to come back. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. I'm a big Buffalo Bills fan, and I came back. I was waiting for him to come back and join me and his little brother to watch the Bills and Raiders, if I recall, which of course I recall. And around 11 o'clock, I'm texting, "Hey, buddy, where are you?" And I get a text from his friend who owned the lake house, the young man whose parents owned the lake house, said, "Mr. McHugh, Chris and three friends are missing." So I jumped in the car, threw my Labrador in the Jeep, grabbed a winter jacket and hunting boots, and drove up, fully anticipating Peggy finding him in a boathouse with a pretty co-ed, or hung over on somebody's couch next door, around the corner, whatever, new pals, whatever. And halfway up, I get a phone call that said, "Mr. McHugh, this is Scotty's uncle, Christopher, and three friends drowned. It's no longer a search, but a recovery. They're all gone." And I kind of went blank, obviously, as I think any parent would do when you get that news. And what I do recall flashing back at that moment, Peg, was 15 years before I had seen a medium kind of on a spiritual quest, lark, whatever. And it mostly was mundane. I didn't have a real sense of urgency at the time, family. I'm a big Irish Catholic family, youngest of 10 kids, and parents had transitioned, brothers and sisters, the older ones, relatively in order, not all, but transitioned. So there was no sense of urgency. But I went, and at the end, she said, "Your dad's here, and he's telling you railroad." Now, if you look over my shoulder, there's a railroad lantern. My dad spent 40 years on the railroad. I was on the railroad. All my brothers during college worked on the railroad. My uncle, my grandfather. We were, in fact, a railroad family. So that was really evidence to me that my old man was somewhere, heaven, other side, wherever Shangri-La, wherever you want to call it. He was somewhere, and I thought, ain't that dandy, And I pretty much just put it in my mental file cabinet. And 16 years later, I drew on that and thought, as I was driving up, if Christopher just went somewhere and my old man is there, they're together, and I need to figure this out. And that literally cemented my path that I've been on for, next month will be 7 years.
What did you start with? Did you start reading literature on afterlife or?
Well, I did. The initial thing I started with is I called that medium from 16 years before. She had since relocated to Surprise, Arizona. And we talked on the phone, and she gave me some incredible evidentiary evidence that it was Chris and what happened. She knew nothing about the accident. Describing the accident, describing the unlaced Timberland boots, the layered clothing. What happened is four of these boys, they were all drinking, partying, shooting pool, came back from a tavern. They're all, in the house playing ping pong, and four of them went outside, and saw an empty boathouse, an open boathouse, jumped in a 3-man canoe with layered clothing and, weather of January 3rd in Wisconsin, unlaced Timberland boots and partially frozen lake. And it was a perfect storm, and they went out and didn't come back, so it was a brutal situation. And those events were described to me by the medium, who told me things I didn't know actually until the police report arrived, or until the coroner's report arrived, weeks later, months later. And so, but I called her, and it gave me life. It gave me a spark of hope that although my son was missing on this side, and I to this moment, dearly miss him on this side, that I will see him again, and maybe I can really connect with him. And that's exactly what I started to do. I read some wonderful books, and from everything from James Van Prague to John Holland. There was a wonderful book by an investigator on the in LA who approached it like an investigation, and he was kind of a guy's guy, so I connected with him. I bought a book that said Connecting with Spirit for Dummies, complete guide to connecting. So I was saying, and the bottom line is, Peggy, I was not a naive guy. I was a car dealer. I'm a blue collar kid at heart, hardworking and successful, very fortunate, and but not naive in any sense. So when I approached this, my approach was, I'm going to see if this metaphysical stuff pans out. And if it doesn't, let's scratch it off the list. Let's figure out something else to kind of soothe my breaking heart, and the more steps I took, the further I got into it, the more I realized that this is as real as you and I talking. The other side is real. They're there. We can connect. It was 6 months after. And it was the guy who wrote the book, The Investigator, was named again Bob Olson. If anybody's listening, it's a wonderful book, Evidence of the Afterlife. And
have you seen James Prague movie, Talking to Heaven?
No, James Van Prague, I've not. I've read his books. He's got a movie called
I
Talking to
believe it's called Talking to Heaven. It's an older movie. I'll send a link to you. It's a really good. It's a movie about his.
Is that about the young man that? What is it? Is it a documentary or is it a movie?
It's a movie, and it's about him as a child. He goes back in time and he learns about a murder in the woods. Like, I think he was on a school trip, and he feels like he goes in the woods and he feels like something, like a spirit's there. And later on, he's an adult. He goes back and he uncovers this murder where a bunch of children were buried there. And it shows his psychic abilities coming out and him dealing with it and things. I believe it's called Talking to Heaven.
I do a lot. I started doing all of that, even right away. Documentaries, YouTube, trying to figure this stuff out. Now, I had no metaphysical background. Take a look at me, Peg. I got a crew cut and a bent nose. I don't look like the guy that would align my chakras and light sage, which is exactly what I did prior to sitting down with you. I have a chakra chart next to me. I have sage and candles. I'm holding a crystal because I'm a savvy guy and I want to cut every edge my way. And if I can get closer to Chris and his existence by participating in these metaphysical habits, I'm going to continue to do that. So I had the benefit of speaking once with James Van Prague on the phone when he was being interviewed by my friend Jan Weigel. And I just a couple of days ago watched him do a presentation live with Helping Parents Heal. I'm very much involved with Helping Parents Heal. I was honored to speak at their international conference in Phoenix in August. It was something, and I'm very close to that group. And if anybody's listening, lost a child, check out Helping Parents Heal. It's outstanding. in all of our journeys who are involved in the metaphysical, those of us who continue on the path, at some point it goes from a believing to a knowing, an aha moment, Peg. And from Bob Olson's website, I didn't realize it was his website until 2 years later, believe it or not. I went online and was researching mediums near me. Now, the medium who told me the information about Chris was great, but she's in Arizona, I'm in Illinois. I want to look into the eyes of somebody talking to my son. So I went on this website and narrowed down the search to this guy that was about 30 minutes away from my house and had great reviews, had worked for police departments finding lost souls, and had a near-death experience himself. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to go see this cat, and made an appointment. I gave him my first name only, and I knew that I could duck out if I wanted to, or cancel if it wasn't for me. And as the day approached to the session, this was June 30th, 2016, so 6 months after Christopher transition. Now, I know the date because it was the day after my wife and my wedding anniversary, which, of course, 6 months after the transition of your son, you don't celebrate, right? But it was 6 months after, so I know the date. Before I went there, I stopped at the grave, and I tell people, Thomas John, a one medium, told me that, he doesn't live there, but it's a really good place for you guys to connect. And we do. It's a thin place for me. So I stopped at the grave. Well, I had moved him over one plot. He was too close to another couple, and it PO'd me. So I moved him over one plot. And I'll occupy the plot he was in for 6 months. And I snore. So those people are in for a long awakening on the other side.
You occupied the plot.
I will occupy the plot that I moved him from. I moved him over one plot.
Okay.
So, and Sally's my wife is on the other side. We bought 3 plots. And so the earth was loose around his grave. They were just putting in the headstone, which you can't do until I'm just outside of Chicago, so it's cold and windy and nasty. So when we bought these 3 plots, we didn't realize that the one we chose for Chris was right next to another couple, and it looked like he was their kid. So that's why I moved them. And it was I was pushed by spirit to make that move, and I'm grateful every time I go there, which is often, that I made that move. You got to listen when you get those voices, and so I went there. I planted some shamrock seeds that I had just gotten from Amazon. Now, my wife didn't know I planted these seeds. Now, I'm not hiding planting shamrock seeds from my beautiful Protestant wife. They showed up. I went there. And before I left, I grabbed out of my dresser this leather bracelet that says Dad on it from Disney World that Chris had given me when he was 4 or 5, maybe 5. And I'd worn it that weekend and put it in my dresser. Never looked at it again. But something compelled me to put it on that day when I went to see the medium, Andrew Anderson. So I put it on under my cuff and went and saw him. And he asked me to bring a couple of pictures of Chris, and I did. And most of the pictures that I chose were Chris celebrating, having fun, Hawaiian shirt, sombrero, Blackhawks jersey, whatever, So I took that to out there, and he looked and he said, these pictures are all of him having fun, but he did have a dark side, which we knew. There was a sadness, and he was drinking too much and had a little depression, but he was loving, wonderful, popular. I mean, there were 2,000 people that came to his wake. That's what kind of kid he was. He was just fun and sweet. So I go to see Andrew, and he tells me that. And he said, "Hey, you celebrated an anniversary yesterday. What was that about?" And I said, "Oh, it was our wedding anniversary." Then he said, "Chris tells me that you were wearing a bracelet he gave you, which was under a coat, a cuff." And he said, and Chris is acknowledging that you planted something in his grave just recently. He said, "When was it?" And I said, 45 minutes ago, when I planted the shamrock seeds. That's the moment, Peg. I went from believing. I believed in this stuff. I did. At that moment, I knew. I knew it was real. I knew Andrew was talking to my son, and I knew my son was delivering messages to me. And we've been on that path since then. And it's a big part of my life. This journey is, I'm writing a third book that's called One Foot in Both Worlds, because technically, because really I have 1 foot in each world and do my best in both.
By still communicating through mediums with him? Is that what you mean by?
I do. There's here on the first anniversary of his transitioning. And I don't like to use the word die, because energy doesn't die. Spirits don't die. Soul doesn't die. I would have said, I would have used that term freely, but it's just inaccurate, So on the first anniversary, I had gone to mediums and spirit circles and checking all this stuff out. Rarely disappointed. Maybe 1 or 2 swing and a miss, but not much. And some evidence that, you couldn't make the stuff up. And people from Rebecca Rosen to Thomas John we saw John crossing over, John Edward. He was amazing. All of them, 300-400 people in the room, and they approach us and talk to us about our son. Chris is a very strong spirit. So in the first year, I'd seen this. I had taken notes, diligent notes about every encounter. I had started recording medium sessions, and I started getting up a couple times a month. I'd just get woken up in the middle of the night, and I'd come into the office. That was his bedroom. His office here was his bedroom. And I light sage, eventually align my chakras, listen to guided meditation, and I would begin to feel him around. It was just comforting. And then I would complete that and go to bed. Well, on January 3rd, 2017, a year after his transitioning, I was feeling him around and went through a guided meditation by a wonderful medium called medium Corrine Boble out of LA, and listened to her guided meditation, which is one of my favorites. And all of a sudden I started getting downloads in my head from Chris. And I'm wondering if I'm leaving the reservation here, and I happen to have a legal pad. I begin my workday at home, and then usually go into an office in the city if I so choose. So I have, pens and legal pads and stuff on my desk, and I just picked it up and started writing messages that he's giving me. And he's describing heaven. He's describing the colors. He's describing the air. And I'm just writing, thinking, okay, maybe they'll lock me up later on, but for now I'm going to keep these notes. And then he got to a point, and this was the point that, he's very good at this, where it was undeniably not me. Now you got to understand, he drowned in a canoe in Wisconsin in the winter where they were all liquored up. And, now they were 21. They weren't babies, but no supervision. And I was PO'd, I was PO'd at the kids' parents, who I felt were just a little too lenient, and PO'd at the young man whose, parents owned the house, for no reason other than you have to be mad at somebody at this point. So I was mad. And I get a download from Chris that says, "You got to let go, Pop," he said. And early on, medium Nancy Myers said to me, "Did he call you something like Pip or Pap?" And I said, "Yeah, it was Pop. He used to call me Pop. Call me Dad when it was serious, Pop when it was playful." And he said to me, "You got to let go, Pop." And he said, "It wasn't Scotty's fault. I loved him. He loved me." Now, I'm getting this download and I'm writing it down. I'm saying, "Sure, Chris, I'll let go of the resentment." I wasn't ready to let go of resentment, Peggy. I wanted to hold on tight with both my hands and all my heart. But, in this interaction, my son asked me to let go of it. Now, fast forward 12 hours. It's the first anniversary. Sally and I are going to go to the grave and launch a Chinese lantern at dusk and hold hands and do what we do. And I get a message from some of his fraternity brothers who are like family to us now. These are just wonderful, just like me, raised like me, lower middle class, a little more diverse in their background. We go to their weddings. We're part of their family. And, they'll all be here for Christopher's celebration of his anniversary again this year, which will be the 7th.
Now, are you talking about the other boys, their families? Is that who you're talking about?
No, this has nothing to do with those boys. I'm talking about his college boys.
Oh, okay.
So they reach out to me and they send a text and said, Mr. McHugh, a few of us are going to go to the grave at around 3. Can you join us? And I thought, sure. I went out to the garage and got a hockey cooler and threw in a bunch of Gatorade and beer and grabbed a handful of cigars and figured I'd go hang out with 4 or 5 of his friends. When I pull up there, the parking lot is like filled. And as I approach the grave, there's 40 kids, 40 they did that whole coconut telegram, thing that they do with media. They were kids from the grammar school to his high school to his college, all at his grave. And I really just started bawling. It was just amazing. And one of the first kids I see there, Peggy, is this Scotty. And I was able to embrace him and say I loved him and Chris loved him and that it wasn't his fault. So it dawned on me that not only was Chris giving me messages from the other side about what heaven's like, he was preparing me for this event that was coming down the line, And once again, the reason I knew it wasn't me, because I didn't want to let go of it. I didn't want to forgive him. I wanted to blame somebody, And that interaction with him and I continues to this day. To this day, twice a month at least, I get pulled out of bed, always at 3 o'clock in the morning. I go into the office, I light sage, I align my chakras, I sprinkle some siesta key sand on my desk and hold a crystal. I have pictures of Chris and lighted candles and I do a guided meditation, and then he takes over and downloads messages to me. And, I was finishing the first book, and the first book was called My Search for Christopher on the Other Side. And I was feeling a bit melancholy because that's a great term, good Irish term, because I was like, wow, when this book is done, when this project is done, will the connection dissipate? And as I'm finishing up that book, I get a download that says, hey, Pop, we're not done yet. We're gonna be writing until you transition, until you cross over. And so it's really reassuring. So second book came out, which is We're Not Done Yet, Pop, My Lessons from the Other Side. And the third one's in process, so we'll just keep doing this for a while, Peg.
Have you heard of the movie, What Dreams May Come? With Robin Williams?
Here. Not only have I heard of that, here, let me go over here.
Well, the producer of it, his name is Stephen Simon, and I had him on my podcast a year ago because he's doing the same thing you are. He's connecting with
I would love to connect with him. I quote that movie all the time. And because it's a very easy way for, somebody with the boots on the ground like myself can understand. So in one scene, Robin Williams transitions and Cuba Gooding Jr. is his spirit guide. Why Robin Williams couldn't wrap his arms around what happened. And Cuba says to him, the origin of the word body is the Anglo-Saxon bodig, meaning abode, which is what the physical body is, a transitional dwelling for the real self. Like you're in your house right now. You're in your house. That doesn't mean you are your house. Your house falls down, you get up and walk away. I quote that all the time. So I would love to just connect with him, send him my books, just talk about our journey, because that was after Christopher transition, I saw that movie, and that scene, that interchange right there, get cleared up, gave me understood the concept of outliving your physical body.
I'll send you those links. I did 2 episodes with him last year.
Wow.
Almost a year
That's
ago.
awesome.
One was this time, one was in December, and then was after the first year. And I'll send that to you.
I would love that.
And he has a book out. And like I say, it's about the same thing you're writing about, but he's connecting with his wife that died.
Wow, I'll get the book. I would love to. That's wonderful. Thank you for that connection.
Mhm. Yeah. And I also had James Bond Prod, his sister on some time
Really?
ago, or a year ago. And she's
Well,
psychic
he
as
was,
well.
I didn't realize that.
Mhm.
I like his books. They're easy to read, they're easy to digest. He's a lovely fella. And he committed actually, which was pretty cool. He said, "How come and the conference is every 2 years in Phoenix, and they didn't have it 2 years before because of COVID. So last year we had it, and a few of us got COVID, but it was well worth the trip." But James on this interview said, "I didn't know you guys had the conference. Can I come next year?" And of course, it was like, can I come next year? It's like telling, they're telling one of the best in the business, how welcome he was. So he's going to come to the Helping Parents Heal International Conference. I was standing next to, I mean, it was amazing. The authors, the mediums, the just phenomenal people that I was brushing shoulders with, that Chris brought me to get his message out there, and it was really very, very humbling and rewarding.
I drowned when I was 5, so I kind of have a little inside information on drowning.
Do
So
you?
yeah. Yeah.
And
And
so
for me, it was very painful. But other guests I've had on was drowned, they didn't feel anything at all. And I was like, well, how come I
Mary
had
C.
all?
Neal,
Yeah, she
Mary
did.
C. Neal wrote about it in her book.
Yeah.
And I actually wrote her an email. I never heard back from her because she was out at the Helping Parents Heal, but I was only going to be able to attend it for a couple of days. I was babysitting my daughter's French bulldog puppy. Well, my wife and daughter were in Italy. I was chasing around a 10-week-old dog, and so I missed her, but I sent her an email and thanked her because Sally and I were always tortured by how the event could have gone for Chris, drowning. And she wrote, and we've been told by mediums and by Chris that it was far from painful. And she wrote a beautiful description of drowning in her book, Heaven and Back, which was really well done. And I was on my way to Wisconsin, see a client, and actually ended up going to the lake where Christopher drowned just on a whim. And Chris said, "Don't go back here anymore. I'm not here, Pop. Has no significance to me." So I'd made 2 trips over the first couple of years and didn't return. But I was listening to her book on Audible. I'm an Audible guy. And I was listening on the way back, and I literally pulled over, started crying because it was so relieving to know Christopher didn't suffer
Yeah.
in his last
Well,
moments.
yeah, even though, it's painful for me, once I was done with that, everything was beautiful. And
Yeah.
I was just this ghost kid and I was all out of body. And then when I come back, I wanted to go back to the pond, knowing that it was painful for me. I accepted that. Like I wanted to go back and I knew it was going to be painful because I wanted to go back where I was. I had a lot of
Yeah.
freedom and I chose that at 5 years old. But then an angel
Yeah.
appeared and says, don't do that. So
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Chris came right through and said, "Don't go back. It's not where I am." I wrote in the second book. In fact, if you're any listeners who are, if you lost a kid, join Helping Parents Heal. Elizabeth Basson has this amazing. She lost a boy. She has 30,000 members. This amazing group of parents, and I was on the website for a session last night with somebody, and I'm fortunate enough to, as a contributor in the interview. So Sue Erickson, who's a wonderful author and past life regressionist and minister, and her and I are doing in January, we're doing a Help Parents Heal session on thin places. Now, thin place is a term I stole from John Holland, but it's an Irish term. It's where the veil is thinnest between the two worlds. And I've traveled to some thin places. I know that my personal thin places. So it's important. It's where the energy is easiest to connect to. And, this room is a thin place. Christopher's grave is a thin place where I sit there with a cigar and a folding chair and my 14-year-old lab that loved Christopher like a sibling, who's with him now. She'd come with me all the time. And I felt him, beaches on the Gulf Coast of Florida. I don't know why it's the Gulf Coast. I don't know. At night, it's overwhelming, the spirit connection there. Lilydale was amazing. I went to, I've experienced a few places that kind of didn't ring the bell, so not all of the thin places are thin places for me. Sedona was no big deal for me. Lilydale in New York was a huge place for me. So, there's another place up by north of Tampa, St. Pete, that I'm going to in February. I want to visit. It's a spiritualist community spun off of Lilydale. So, I'm seeking these places where the connection is onion paper thin, where we can connect with the other side, Chris and other family members.
I heard you say you were raised Irish Catholic.
Yes.
I heard somebody recently say that they combined their meditation, they combined it with prayer, and they was really transported. So I didn't know if you tried that.
Well, prayer is talking to God. Right. Meditation is listening. So I believe deeply in both prayer and meditation. I mean, I'm not a practicing Catholic. I don't have a huge issue with the church. I think a lot of the things they do well. I think a lot of the things they screw the pooch. I think I'm a believer in Christ. I believe in Buddha. I believe that these are all ascended masters. I believe Christ is probably the favorite son of God. But we're all sons of God. And he said that through the entire, if you read St. Matthew, he talks about that. One time the apostles were all sitting around ooh and ah, and after he did a miracle, and he said, that much and more you can do in my Father's name, meaning the power wasn't him as the human child of God, but it's just from his Father. So I'm a big fan of that, big fan of that. I'll tell you, I say the rosary every day now. I say it every day. It just gets me in more of a meditative kind place. That's prayer, and meditation is receiving, and I know my son is call what you want, man. You want to call it God, Yahweh. You want to call it the Great Spirit, whatever you want to call it. It's okay. It's the source. It's what started this whole thing, and who is, the Father of all of us. So I don't know if you saw a wonderful book called The Shack, and they did a great movie. Mm-hmm. And God in the first part of this movie was a woman, an African-American woman, very maternal, loving. And I love what she said, that just because I work incredible good out of unspeakable tragedies doesn't mean I orchestrate the tragedies. So I think that's when people say, God did this to me. God didn't. God didn't take my son. I'll tell you something, Peg. Right after Chris drowned, I was not pleased. The days were full of details. You had funerals and readings and receptions and burial sites and tombstones and all of the things that go on with something that you don't expect to do for a 21-year-old boy. And so at the end of the day, I hit my knees, and I've been sober 37 years. I was a bit of a wild man, in my youth, and got sober at 28, and I believe God lifted compulsion. And I often wondered why he spared me when other people who lived the way I did didn't make it. And it was only after Chris transition that I knew that he spared me, because I'm supposed to be talking to parents who've lost kids, talking to people who lost significant others, giving them hope, giving them a path. I'm just a couple laps around the track ahead of them. I'm far from an expert, but I would hit my knees and I'd thank God for my family and my sobriety. But I said, we're not good, you and me. You took my kid. And I did this 3 nights in a row. And the third night I got in bed, ready to just pass out. And I got a message that said, I didn't take your son. His free will and recklessness caused him to come home early, and I welcomed him. And remember, I lost a son too. It was at that moment, Peg, that I knew God wasn't a chess master, moving us around for his satisfaction or to make me pay for my past sins. You know, Christopher had a free will. Christopher also had exit points. Christopher also had a soul agreement, as do I, you know. And unfortunately, his soul agreement led to what we're doing right here. You know, I would rather be abysmally ignorant of all things metaphysical and watch the Thursday night football game tomorrow night with my kid having some chicken wings, if I could make that deal. But that deal isn't out there. The deal that I have is this tragic event that caused my son to actually transition and be in bliss and happiness and with family in a wonderful spot where he's at, and heartbroken, journey for me. But that helps others. You know, he tells me all the time, two most important things is love and service, Pop. And he said, you gotta help others, you know. And I'm not saying I was a pirate or a bad guy before, but I was far more selfish. I wouldn't have taken 9 o'clock in the morning to talk to you for an hour. I have things to do, you know, some of it just self-serving, right? But I'm a different guy than I was. And, you know, I talk about Haruki Murakami, and he said, once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain. When you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. That's what storms are all about. What a waste if my son's transitioning didn't change me, right? Didn't change me. I live my life two ways, Peg. I want to please my God, and I want to make my son proud. And as long as I follow those two tenets, I can't go wrong.
Very well. Very well said.
Thank you.
It's hard. It's like, you know, some of us love so deeply, you know, and that we have no choice but to help others to come out of our own pain, because it seems like that's the only way for us to heal in some way.
Well, that's the only way I think that you can heal, but a lot of people don't make that choice. A lot of people stay in bitterness and resentment and blame. You know, I know some, you know, and it's too bad, because this event shouldn't, as horrible as it is, shouldn't be wasted. You know, shouldn't be. I don't want my son disappointed in how I act. I want him proud of me, and I believe he is.
What about your wife? Is she dealing with it in the same way you are?
You know what? My wife is absolutely wonderful. Her life is dedicated to helping others. She's a brilliant therapist. You know, it's a wonderful practice right here in the house. And it's all telehealth and computer. Eventually go back in person, I assume, but I like it the way it is. I can walk around the house in sweatpants and not worry about banging into her clients. But and she feels Chris all around her, you know. Now, people question all the time, and she's coming out with her first book, which will be brilliant. She's a lot smarter than I am, and thank God, a lot better looking. Therefore, Chris was gorgeous, you know, and she's always connected and believed in this. She's a very spiritual gal. And some people said, well, how come you get the downloads and she doesn't? Now, she knows Chris around her. She sees mediums. The evidence is unbelievably concrete, you know, a medium on the phone describing the color of the room because Chris is telling her, you know, what she does for a living because Chris is telling her, that's evidentiary part is important. You know, that's why they're called evidentiary mediums. They give you evidence that soul is talking to you. You can't fake that stuff. And it's stuff that's not on Facebook and it's not on Google, you know. Now, here's the thing. I think Chris and I were very close. I did a past life regression. Look at me, Peg. Do I look like a guy that would do a past life regression? You know, I did a past life regression with Sue Frederick, who's beautiful, brilliant, and love her. And I did it. And, you know, and it's confirmed what had been told by other mediums that Christopher and I had been through other lives together. We were very comfortable together. We could just hang. We could just hang and chatter like chatterboxes or say nothing. We could just hang and just listen to music, you know, and we could just be. That was what we could be, you know. And so I wasn't surprised that we had spent other lifetimes together, sometimes as siblings, which why it always seemed so comfortable, you know. But Chris is adamant about the fact that the reason I'm chosen to get these messages, and believe me, every sentence, every paragraph in that book, every keystroke, Chris was next to me. I'm just the vehicle. And so, I'll wake up with this wonderful idea and sit down and write a chapter. Do I really think that's me? I'm not that smart, Peg.
I
I'm
understand
charming. I'm a heck of a guy. I'm fun to be around, but I'm not that smart, or insightful or deep. So I'll write these amazing passages that came through my son, came from spirit. So Christopher's adamant the fact that I need to keep this up because I am an ambassador, because I don't look like a guy that would do the things I do. That guys, fathers, women are allowed to grieve. Men think that they're not. They're supposed to suck it up. You know what I mean? Cowboy on, right? That's what they think. And the bottom line is, I'm a guy's guy. But when that tsunami hits me, which it does, a piece of every day, I let it happen. I cry, I then get on with my day, and do the things I got to do as a responsible parent, husband, employee. But I allow myself those feelings, and that's directly proportional to the love that I feel for my son. But guys sometimes think they're supposed to just, suck up, and that's not it, man. You got to drop the rock. You got to share it. There's very few places I'm more comfortable than hanging around in a locker room, right? But trying to take that locker room outside and pretend that's who you are, that's not, We're all loving, caring beings, sons of God, daughters of God. So the dads listening, just let it go, man. Reach out. I'm sitting at lunch the other day and just started with two of my best friends who are guys and wonderful fellows and supportive and completely on board with my journey. And my tears filled up. We're getting near the holidays. It's hard, right? I don't feel judged. I feel loved. One of the benefits of growing up in an Irish Catholic family is the neighbors hated us. We moved to the suburbs when I was like 5 or 6. We had too many kids, made too much noise. Parties were too loud. Football games would break out on the front lawn or in the middle of the street. And somebody gave me a quote that really explained why I'm allowed to walk out carrying this message and not really caring if somebody else doesn't get it or judges me for it. And they said, it's the unassailable self-confidence that comes from a childhood insulated with love. I have that up on my wall. I was loved growing up. So I knew that I was loved. And so if anybody outside the family didn't get it, I don't care. Well, now I've extended that family to anybody who's lost somebody, anybody that needs a guiding hand, anybody that needs a little love. I used to fly 1,100 miles to see my sister Marcia. And I would say, Marcia, I'm having a hard time. And she'd say, I know, honey, I know. And that's the kind of people I surround myself with. That's the kind of people I want to be, right?
Yeah.
And so, she's now with Chris. Chris and her were so close. She was Christopher's godmother. And she was so close. And when she transitioned, Chris had said, I'll be there, Dad. I'll be there the minute she crosses. I promise. And then a couple of days after transition, he came through and said, we were all there. Jerry, Bobby, Bill. He named all the siblings. He said, we were all there. And he said, but then she had to go somewhere like a spa. And when she came back, she was younger than when I was a kid. And it took me a while to figure out what that was, is that she died of cancer. And although the cancer stayed with her body on this side, the trauma crossed with her. And she had to go somewhere. And what a perfect term for a young man to use for his aunt to understand, like a spa, for all of us to understand, where her soul could be cleansed of this trauma, right? And when she came back, she was in her prime. She was when she was teaching high school, when she was in, her late 30s, raising her kids. And that's how she is to him now. And that's how she'll be when she comes through to me. And she's come through to me in mediums. I'll tell you a great story about her. I was with her the week before she transitioned. And all her kids were there when she did go. And it was perfect. And we had spent a lot of time together. And it was right here, not far from a beach in Naples. So I would leave hospice and go down to the beach and sit on the sand and have a cigar and connect with Chris. And so she said to me, my wonderful nephew, her son Norman, downloaded my first book to her, for her. And although she had read it, of course, the minute it came out, she would go to sleep listening to this book. And she said to me, she said, honey, Joey, she'd call me Joey. She'd say, I was 5 years old when I stood up in her wedding as a ring bearer. She said, Joey, you gave me the greatest gift. I read your book and I'm not afraid to die.
Oh.
Now, here's a woman that loved me when I wasn't lovable. There were periods in my life when I was not the most lovable cat in the world, right? And she loved me through that, loved my son through that. And a year later, I went to a medium on my birthday, Jill Nicole in the western suburbs. It's a great gal. It's funny, she used to do medium readings in her house, and I'd go out there. And her neighbors were Mormons, and they complained that she was doing devil worship or something. So now she only does it on Zoom, and she's a fabulous, fabulous medium. And I went and saw her, and she goes, Chris is here, but there's a woman with, granny glasses and round glasses and short dark hair and very pretty, and she has the title of mother, godmother, sister, aunt. I said, yeah, that's Marcia. He goes, yeah, describe Marcia. And she said, she's got a message. She said, did she call you Joey? I said, yeah, she did. Because she's saying, honey, Joey, thank you for the greatest gift. Now, you can't make that stuff up. By the way, that conversation is going in the third book because it happened after 2019, right? So there was no evidence of that conversation anywhere. It wasn't published. It wasn't on Facebook. It wasn't on I didn't write a paper. Nowhere except between Chris, Jill Nicole, and me.
Well, you have taken
I
your
like them.
pain.
How do you like them apples?
You have taken your pain and suffering and transformed it into something amazingly beautiful. It's
Well,
like
thanks,
art.
Peggy.
It is. It's an art to take something so hard and unbearable and turn it into what you have.
Well, but I don't want anybody to misunderstand. Manchester by the Sea. Remember that movie? You seem to be a movie gal. And there was she lost kids in a fire, and she said, my heart was broken. It'll always be broken. And anybody who said time heals all wounds never lost a kid, right? So anybody listening, I'm on this path. It's rewarding. It's amazing. I feel close to my son. But it certainly isn't the deal I wanted, right? This wasn't a path I would have chosen. But, the pain, we acquire tools to handle it. And this is one of them, what I'm doing, writing, talking. But the pain's part of you. And the pain will be part of me until I transition and he's there for me, right? So, just, do your part, help others. But if you think it's going away, think again, the pain's going to be there. But it's just part of life.
And it looks like, what we do with that pain.
Yeah.
It's there. You can't deny it.
Yeah.
And what do you do with it? Do you make
Yeah.
something out of it that can
Right.
help other people going through it? Or do you keep yourself inside of a shell and hold on to
Right.
anger, bitterness, whatever you hang on to?
But don't give me too much credit, Peggy. I didn't elect this. I didn't choose this path. It was very strongly put to me by my
Right,
son
but it's
that
what you
this is
did
the
with
path
it,
I
though.
need to be
It
on.
takes a lot of
Yeah.
courage.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do this podcast, for people to hear stories like yours, and we all have as they say, crosses to bear.
Right.
And if we can all find a way to help the world be a better place in some way out of what we've endured, that's the most I
Right.
think we can do. And it sounds like your son, Chris, is really encouraging you to keep
He
going.
is.
And that's awesome.
To carry his message, and I think to help me evolve, So any of your listeners, my email is jbmcquillen@gmail.com. My website is joemcquillen.net. So please reach out, questions, affirmations, whatever, I can do, I'm going to do. And I'm going to answer every single email. And both books one's my Search for Christopher on the Other Side, and the others, We're Not Done Yet, Papa Revolve. They're available on Amazon and Kindle and softcover and print and in Audible. And in all humility, I can say that they're two of the best books written on the metaphysical subject. And I can say that because, man, I was just the scribe, they were really messages and our messages from my boy. And I think they help anybody on their journey, their personal journey.
Anybody wants that, I'll put that in the description. I'll list your books and
Thank
your
you.
email and your website. So,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And
Well, my pleasure.
happy holiday, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And tell your wife I said hello. And I'll send
I will
you
keep.
some
Yeah.
things we discussed there.
I would love that link. I would like to reach out. I'd love to connect because it was a significant part of my journey and I appreciate it.
Uh-huh.
All right. Keep the faith, Peg. See ya.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.